Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Tech Talk, a podcast where Amit and I talk about various technology related topics. Today, we're going to talk about in flight Wi Fi. I know we've talked about Wi Fi in the past, but in flight Wi Fi is a whole new realm of technology, and we thought it would be a really good idea to talk about it. We're both interested in it. Amit, thank you for coming up with this topic. I'm actually not very well versed in in-flight Wi-Fi, although I have experience as a consumer. I would like to know what happens in the back end of the technical working of in-flight Wi-Fi. And hopefully a lot of our audience would have also experienced this, but because now it's slowly becoming more and more commonplace within airlines that they are providing various Wi-Fi sort of packages while you're flying. Sometimes it's included within the flight. Sometimes you have you have it as an add-on to your flight to purchase. But nonetheless, it's actually a very interesting topic on. I've always wondered how the Wi-Fi or the data transfer happens when you are, thousands of miles, not thousands of miles, but thousands of meters above the air, and how this connection of data happens. Because yeah, power is one thing, but connecting data to Earth while you're flying midair is actually quite interesting, and I'd like to know more about it. And Amit, you've done some research already, I think, and I've read your the weekly newsletter as well, and you've covered some of the topics over there. But it would be good to know directly from you about this topic. So yeah, without further ado, let's start with in-flight Wi-Fi. What's your sort of beginning thought on this topic, Amit?
So thanks, Rinat, again for that good introduction. Yes, in-flight Wi-Fi. We've spoken about Wi-Fi, but in-flight Wi-Fi is something very interesting. And the reason I wrote about it in my newsletter this week was because I recently traveled to Morocco, and while returning, I saw and I went on a British Airways flight, and during my return flight, I saw that they have a URL, and that URL said access BT Wi-Fi at this. Wi-Fi access point, and then go to this website to order food. So basically, on British Airways flight to Morocco, and I had an economy seat, so I didn't buy the food, and they don't give food for free. So you had to buy the food. But instead of calling the air hostess or the air host to your seat and asking them what food options you have, can I have this if it's available, etc., etc., what they did is they had like an intranet site. So they had a local website hosted, and that website could track how many items they have in their inventory and what is available to sell and what is the cost, and I could order it directly from my phone by connecting it to the so I could order it directly from my phone by connecting to the Wi-Fi and going to their website. Now the thing is, I was wondering, okay, so I've connected to their website, it's working fine, I placed an order and they accepted payment by card. So it's a wireless transaction. So it's not even, I tapped the card. I didn't even enter a pin. I tapped the card. It was contactless, and then the payment got accepted. It got approved, and and I had my snacks, and everything was fine. And then I was wondering how is it that it's working? How is the whole system working? How does the Wi-Fi work? And then I saw that they had certain packages to buy. So packages for video streaming and packages for just text. Like if you want to send a message via WhatsApp or something, then they had packages for that. And they had packages priced at different levels based on what you want to use. Packages for text are much cheaper than packages for proper internet with streaming, etc. Of course, I didn't buy it because it was paid, and I was like, okay, I don't want to pay for it. I've anyway paid for the flight, so I don't want to pay for add-ons. So then I came home and I did my research, and that's where I figured out, wow, it is a very, very fascinating world. But I think before we talk about in-flight Wi-Fi, we need to understand how planes are moving and how the Wi-Fi system actually works, or not the Wi-Fi system itself, because see, the plane has to be connected to the internet. or some kind of a
Absolutely.
wireless network.
Yeah, and that's what really confuses me because it's so far away from all the cell towers and everything. And I definitely want to know more about it. But there's one thing that I'm just a little bit confused as you were just speaking about tapping your contactless card. But why do you have to tap? If you are doing it everything online, why don't you just give your the 16-digit
So, so I think
number?
it is much quicker to do the transaction on the payment POS machine rather than doing
Hmm.
it in the intranet. So
So
they
at
didn't
the
develop a
time,
payment page. They just said, okay, select the seat number, select your item, and the good thing is, like once I ordered the item, I wanted to see what other items are available. So after my order, I went back to the site, and the item that I ordered previously was no longer available. So it means the stock was over. So it was also updated automatically. So that was a kind of very nice because then I know okay what is available, and they had also the option because I'm vegan. I could see whether it's vegetarian, vegan, etc. So it was kind of nice to actually see rather than asking the air hostess like okay. What is the ingredient? What is available? What are the different items, etc., etc. So this was much more faster because everyone can order for themselves and they will just directly come to the seat with the item, take the payment, go.
right, okay. So this is a lot smarter than what you would, probably just initially assume because it actually is tracking your stock availability
Yes,
as well as doing all the things that you would want to do. And it had the option to pay over the POS machine rather than
that
alternative
is what
way.
I was surprised because the site itself, I'm guessing it's hosted on the aircraft, what do you say, the aircraft, the aeroplane itself. So it's not something that is hosted on the internet which we are accessing. It is hosted on a hard disk on the aircraft, and we are just accessing it via the Wi-Fi. So do you know, right? When you have Wi-Fi in your house, you can access sites which are hosted on your machine because you're on the
Yes.
same network. So similarly, if you are hosting Wi-Fi, you are transmitting, you are allowing other people to connect to your network, and if on your network you host a website which is local, then people can access it without actually going to the internet.
Yes, yes, that's actually very interesting because you access it in the same way like you would when you go to the internet, like with Samsung browser or for Apple
Exactly,
using
exactly.
Safari, etc. But you're not actually going to the internet of the whole. It's not the whole of the internet is that not actually open to you when you actually access the intranet site, and it's actually very interesting to know and be aware of because you're thinking that, oh, I have the whole of the internet in my access right now, but you actually don't. You have to actually, in some cases, you have to pay for that kind of internet connection.
Yes. So, as airlines have progressed in terms of their technological capabilities, what has happened is things have become more and more expensive to run the airline for even the passengers. So they have reduced the cost of the ticket, but what they have done is they've removed what was available as part of that ticket. So earlier you could get free food, priority boarding, etc., etc. Now for priority boarding you pay extra. For selecting the seats you pay extra. For getting on-board food you pay extra. For Wi-Fi you pay extra. So for everything is now an add-on. But coming back to Wi-Fi, now you have to think there are a couple of things that are happening. And that's and let's try to understand how it would logically work. So you need internet. For that, you need to connect to a network. You can't connect via cable, so you need to connect to a network wirelessly. What is the other devices that you know of that talk to the internet wirelessly?
Well, I mean, the only thing I can think of is a router where I my devices connect to the router wirelessly, but the router itself is connected to the internet.
Via a wire.
Wireless.
But what
Yeah,
other device can you think of that can talk to the internet wirelessly?
I can't think of any, to be
Your
honest.
smartphone.
Yes, but that is connecting. Oh, right, of course, directly to the cell towers. Yes, yes,
Exactly.
absolutely.
So that's
That's
wireless connection, right?
yes, yes,
So
that is yes.
when
I
you're
mean,
on the
not just
go,
Wi-Fi, but my cell phone can actually connect to the cell
so
towers completely wirelessly, and that actually has a lot, like a bigger band, not necessarily bandwidth, but the range is a lot bigger than a
um,
Wi-Fi router.
I mean, yes, you can say that. You still have to be in that in the cell tower zone. If you go to a place where there is no cell tower, of course you'll not get connection. It's similar to
Mm-hmm.
Wi-Fi. But so now you think, okay, cell phone tower, right? So
Mm-hmm.
that makes sense, right? What other things can you talk? Say, so you have a smartphone that can go online. I mean, you can go and access Facebook via the cell phone tower. So I'm guessing the aircraft is also talking to the internet via cell phone tower.
Right. Okay. So cell phone tower has a spherical range, right?
Yeah.
That's very interesting because you think about cell phone towers are actually quite high up. It's a tall structure that to cover most of the the as much as land as possible. But you don't think about that they're also at the same time covering above that point as well. It's a spherical area that they're covering, and it's very interesting that how far above they can cover because there's not no obstruction either. So that could be an interesting thing to.
But of course, as the signal travels, the signal
Mm-hmm.
dissipates, so you will not get the same strength at the end,
Mm-hmm.
especially
Yeah.
at that altitude. So the aircrafts that are cruising at say 10,000, 20,000 meter, even 30,000 meter altitude. So then that's quite high. But say it's not a cell phone tower, it's a tower that broadcasts internet, but that's specifically for airline, or it could be a cell phone tower. So I don't know for sure, but there is a tower that can transmit wirelessly a signal that can the aircraft can receive via an antenna. Let's say it's an antenna, it's pointing down to the earth, and then it receives a signal. It then receives that signal. It has a router on the aircraft. To that router, everyone connects wirelessly. That's the Wi-Fi. And through that router, the data transfer takes place up and down, up and down, up and down. Right? So it makes sense, right? So that's a very logical thing that would work. Now, what is the other way in which it can work? So this scenario is called air to ground, ATG. So this is air to ground way of broadcasting internet signal to the aircraft while it's moving in the air. Of course, it has its limitations, which we'll discuss. But now, let's think about what are the other possibilities. We have thought about air to ground. Is there any other possibility?
So I can't think of any off the top of my head, but the only thing I could think of is, other planes that are also in other objects that are also in the air. And the only thing I could think of is Starlink. But that's also going to be quite far away because Starlink is a satellite because that I would imagine the distance from the plane to the satellite would be higher than the distance from the ground to the plane itself. But then again, the
So
satellite is broadcasting to ground, so I'm actually confused, and
So,
I'm
so yeah,
yeah,
you're right.
enlightened.
Absolutely. I think you've hit the nail at the right place. And the thing is, yes, air to ground, sorry, ground to air or air to ground. So that's one way, and then satellite to aircraft. That's another way. So you send a signal from the ground up, or you send the signal via the ground to the satellite that sends it to the aircraft. Because remember, satellite itself doesn't have the internet. It still has to communicate via a ground control station, right? So the signal goes to the satellite, comes down to a ground station, goes to your data center, gets the data, sends it to the satellite, satellite then sends it to the aircraft.
Right, that's very interesting. I know we had an episode on Starlink, but I don't remember exactly the inner workings of it.
No,
So
but
so
forget
basically,
about Starlink. I mean, Starlink is there, yes,
mhm.
it's an internet, but you have to point to the direction of the satellite constantly using an antenna.
Hmm.
Now imagine you have an aircraft that's moving at thousands of kilometers an hour. It has an access point. That access point or the antenna is on top of the aircraft. Okay, so it's situated outside the aircraft. So suppose the aircraft, Boeing or Airbus, which are the two most popular airlines manufacturers in the world, they create the aircraft, but they have not installed a router. So you build a house, but you don't have a router. So you take a connection from Virgin or O2 or TalkTalk or 3UK, etc. So now imagine you buy the hardware. So you buy the aircraft from Boeing or Airbus, but now you have to install a router or an antenna on the aircraft. So that should cost you some money. So you go to Starlink and you say, or you go to some other satellite provider, Viasat or many other things, many other companies, and you ask them, okay, I need to access your constellation. So now imagine aircraft is moving, satellite is moving. Not at any given point of time, they both may not be at the same location. So you need multiple satellites so that it can provide a broader coverage. If you have one or two satellites, it will not provide enough coverage across the planet. But if you have multiple satellites, it provides more coverage. So that's a constellation of satellites. Now, this constellation of satellites can provide a good coverage based on the location of the aircraft in the air, and that aircraft has an antenna or an access point that points to the sky, looking for that satellite and trying to talk to it. And the satellites, as you know, can orbit at different heights or altitudes. One is a geostationary orbit, so it's fixed to a location on the Earth. So suppose you have a satellite at the geostationary orbit, which is I think 36,000 kilometers, then basically that is fixed, say, to London. And with Earth's rotation, it also covers one rotation in 24 hours. So it's constantly fixed on top of London, right? So that's geostationary. And then you have
Hmm.
low Earth orbit, which is called LEO, which is where the International Space Station orbits, and which is where Starlink and other satellites companies are trying to operate, because then it means that they don't have to send the signal so far up. It's just 400 kilometers up. 400 kilometers is not very far.
Right. Okay. I mean, 400, that's like 400,000 meters.
Yes,
The plane is a lot lower than that,
the
right?
plane is about 36 to 30,000 meters, 36,000 meters. Yeah.
Yeah, so 400,000 and 36,000 is like, 10% of the actual height of the satellite.
Yes,
So it's far away from the satellite.
it is far away, but the satellites are much powerful. Now think like this. When you watch a YouTube video on your phone over the cell phone tower, what's happening?
The cell phone tower is transmitting the data to my computer or to my device.
To your smartphone.
Hmm.
But the thing is, the smartphone itself is not just yours. There are many other smartphones. So basically, the
Hmm.
bandwidth is being shared. Now think of watching a television. So you're just
Yeah.
receiving the signal. You're not transmitting anything, right? When you broadcast
Yeah.
television. So satellites are
Yeah.
that way very powerful in terms
Right.
of broadcasting a signal, and you're just receiving it. Now, if you want to send a signal back to satellite, of course, it requires additional machinery. And that's where you have special satellites that are operated by special companies that can not just broadcast a signal, but can also receive a signal, send it, and then receive back and forth. So that's where companies like Starlink come in. So you have two ways to connect to the internet on an aircraft. One is via the satellite, and the other is via the cell phone tower. The cell
Right.
phone tower has low bandwidth, the satellites have high bandwidth, purely because satellites are much more powerful compared to a cell phone tower. But there are now limitations of all these systems, and let's talk about the limitations. When an aircraft is flying, what are the different kind of terrain it will cover? Can you think of something?
Well, there's all kinds of there is like oceans, and then there is mountains, and then there are cities with a lot of, I would imagine, a lot of sort of interruptions in radio frequency and other frequencies. Yeah.
So basically, when a aircraft is flying over the Pacific or the Atlantic Ocean, it won't get a cell phone tower.
Mm.
So you can't use a
Yeah.
Wi-Fi where if it is using air to ground Wi-Fi system, then you can't use it when it's flying over the Pacific Ocean or the Atlantic Ocean or any other ocean. So that's one way. If you're flying over Mount Everest or the Himalayas, you won't have a tower, so you can't operate there, right?
Hmm.
So those kind of hostile terrains where you can't install machinery or towers are out of scope now for the aircraft. What else could be limiting the bandwidth? When an aircraft is traveling, is the aircraft alone? No, there are multiple
Yeah.
aircrafts flying at the same time, mostly separated by say 100 to 200-meter altitude, but they are flying to almost the same destination. So when I want to go from say London to New York, it's not just one airline that's going. There are multiple airlines that are flying one after the other. So
Hmm.
if
Yeah.
all these airlines want to provide internet, that internet is coming say from air to ground kind of a Wi-Fi, then that tower is sending Wi-Fi to not just one aircraft but multiple aircrafts. So the bandwidth gets split. Plus, on the aircraft itself, there are multiple people who want to access internet, so that bandwidth gets split further. Now, there is a
But
reason.
multiple people in one aircraft is managed by the by a central router for the
Central
aircraft,
router,
right?
yes, but they are still sharing the bandwidth, right? So if I
Mm,
connect a
yes.
lot of devices to my Wi-Fi router, my speed on each device will slow down, right? That's what we discussed in the Wi-Fi topic. Now, similarly, when you have to share the bandwidth across multiple aircraft and multiple people on a single aircraft, the bandwidth reduces quite a lot. And the way airlines manage this is by charging you for the internet. And that's where the packages come, because the packages are there for people who really want it. So they want to filter out people who don't want to pay. So there is less crowd on the Wi-Fi.
Right. Okay. Well, I would hardly imagine that's the reason they introduced the pay system, because obviously they do also want to make some revenue out of
They want to make some revenue,
releasing.
but the customer experience will be very bad if everyone tries to get on the internet. So
Right.
one of the ways to limit people getting on the internet is by charging them.
So that's very interesting. So I flew quite a few times already this year, but most of them was to the west, sorry, the east of the globe, if you have it as a flat map. But end of this year, I'm flying to New York, and in my flight there is in-flight Wi-Fi, which is included, and that's included for everyone. So that's a very interesting sort of offset from when I was flying to east than when I'm flying to west of London. But how are they managing the bandwidth in that scenario?
So
Especially, I'm crossing the
Atlantic
ocean.
Ocean.
Yes.
So in that scenario, satellite comes,
Mm,
because
right.
satellite can provide coverage all across the world, no matter where you are, even on Mount Everest, on the top of Mount Everest. So you can provide satellite coverage in the middle of the ocean, on top of Mount Everest,
Yes.
in
Of
in
course,
a
it doesn't
desert.
matter what's in the ground.
Exactly.
So does air so what you're saying is when we're, like the space between, say, England and China, they're covered with air to ground connections, but then when we go to Atlantic Ocean, it's mostly covered with satellite connection. But why not satellite connection throughout the globe? Because
So,
that sounds like the better option.
true. So when the in-flight Wi-Fi actually started, it started with air to ground because that was taking the available infrastructure. Remember, for TV broadcast and satellite phones, the satellites were still getting launched, but the speeds were very slow. And as I said, TV is for broadcast. It's not for, you don't send a signal back to the television satellite. You just receive it and then you use it. And the signal is being broadcast everywhere. So any antenna that picks up the signal consumes it. So you don't have a bandwidth issue. So those satellites were there, but now you needed new satellites, and those new satellites have now come into the picture. And that's why Starlink, who has recently announced that they are going to launch Starlink Aviation, that is going to provide low latency, high bandwidth, almost up to 100 Mbps. I think no, not 100 Mbps, up to I think it is I think about 300 Mbps. So air to ground is about 20 Mbps. Then the satellite before Starlink was about 20 to 50, even 100 Mbps, and with Starlink it would be about 300 plus Mbps. So that's the
Mm.
difference. And the thing is, now even with Starlink or any other type of satellite constellation Wi-Fi, the signal still has to be shared across different aircrafts. And again, on the aircraft itself, you'll have other people who are using the internet, right? So it
Yeah.
has to be shared. So again, those limitations are there. But if you send a signal closer, what is latency? Latency is time it takes to send a signal and receive a response. Now, suppose something is very far, it takes more time to send something and receive something. So, suppose you say that, okay, I've received 100 KB of data, then you say, okay, I've received 100 KB, send me another 100 KB. But you receive 100 KB, it takes 10 milliseconds. Then you send the signal back saying I've received it, 10 milliseconds. Then it sends the second round of 100 KB, another 10 milliseconds. So it's taken 30 milliseconds to receive just 200 KB,
Mm-hmm.
right? Instead of say 20 milliseconds. Now with say Starlink, it takes 1 millisecond because it's much closer to the aircraft because it flies at a lower orbit. So so it takes say 1 millisecond. So now 1 millisecond, it means that the time to stream a video of say 10 MB now is reduced. So your latency is better. So you don't get connecting when you are actually watching something on the internet, right? So in-flight Wi-Fi experience is predominantly very bad because of these limitations. But satellite companies are now getting into the market, and low Earth orbit is where the biggest what do you say gains can be perceived, because low Earth orbit is where you can transmit data very quickly to planet Earth, and you can talk to the ground station. And imagine if Starlink has about say 1,000 satellites in its constellation, it can provide you coverage anywhere in the world, wherever you are. So
Yeah.
that's the game changing part.
That is definitely a game changer because yeah, I mean it's just a completely different game than air to ground because you don't have any obstructions and all of the earth is kind of available to reach. So absolutely, yeah. I mean if there is an option, but I would imagine it's more expensive to do it rather than air to ground, which is probably why the first attempt was to sort of opt for the existing infrastructure.
Exactly.
But yeah,
Plus,
certain.
the other thing is cell phone towers, they operate at certain frequencies, which are low frequencies, so it can go through the walls. So low frequencies like radio waves, they can go through objects like walls, etc. So that's why you can get a cell phone signal inside your house, because it can go through the walls, it can go through trains,
Hmm.
etc. With us, with satellites, what happened is they did high frequency. Now high frequencies get obstructed quite easily, but they have more bandwidth, more speed, etc.
Hmm.
So
Yeah, so that's not necessarily a limitation. That's just tailored to the situation. Because it's satellite, it can do higher frequency with higher bandwidth as a result. But because air to ground or cell towers have to go through walls to make it usable, that's why they have to sort of opt for higher frequency. But that's
lower
so this
frequency, cell
lower
phone lower
frequency,
frequency,
yes,
yes.
yes, absolutely. So I'm just trying to summarize what we've just gone through. So there are two different types of connection: air to ground. When we're talking about in-flight Wi-Fi, there's air to ground, and that has its limitation and also its benefits from a business perspective, not necessarily from a consumer perspective, I would imagine, because the speed is lower, etc., etc. But then there is another type, which is satellite to aircraft, and that is more beneficial, I would imagine, for the consumer. That also has advantages and disadvantages for business, but that's usually the case in any business. So these are the two ways aircraft connects to internet while you're flying. Now, Um, is there any other aspect of in-flight Wi-Fi that
So
you
there
know
is
that?
another aspect. When you know that aircrafts sometimes they do crash, and when they do crash, people search for something called as the black box. The
Mm-hmm.
black box records all the data, the last few seconds or few minutes of the data or from the flight, and then it stores it, and it's made in such a way that it doesn't get destroyed in the eventuality of a crash. Now, and now there are flight trackers. There are sites like FlightAware and many other websites where you can track exactly where the flight is in real time. So you can, like within a few seconds, you get an update about where the flight is.
I have to say that that is such an amazing website. You could just see the whole world. And I would like to sort of clarify something to our audience in case it feels like unlikely, because if you go and zoom out to see the whole world, you see the whole of our sky is covered in planes. But if you look up in the sky, you don't see any planes the way the amount of planes you see on the air right now. But that's because it's not to scale. The icons
Yes.
as you see in the website, they're not to scale. And in actuality, the aircraft is a way smaller in relation to the Earth. So just so you would be able to see it in the website, they made it a little bit bigger. But yeah, just to be aware of this, that just because it seems like there's so many planes flying. Yes, there are so many planes flying, but that doesn't mean that it's covering the sky or that they will crash into each other. Just.
I mean, we talked about in-flight Wi-Fi, but the whole idea about getting internet while you are in air is very important because you want to transmit flight information constantly,
Mm-hmm.
right? In case there is a crash, you want to have up to the like after every millisecond or every second you want to send information, your height, your speed, what's happening inside the aircraft, etc, etc. So it has got nothing to do with Wi-Fi, but it has got everything to do with how the technology is progressing in order to provide this capability on aircrafts. Why? Because black box itself is a limitation. It's a hardware device. It can get damaged or it can get lost if you get crashed in the ocean. The ocean currents can take the black box from one location to thousands of kilometers away from the actual crash site. So it's very difficult to find a black box. But if you transmit signals constantly, then you can exactly know where it landed, how it landed, what were the conditions inside, etc., etc. And this is why the technology is now being pushed in a way that they want to constantly give information no matter where they are to satellites. So that's why the satellites now come into the picture more prominently because the world is moving in that direction. And then because they are constantly transmitting data, it has the additional benefit of using Wi-Fi. So it's not a separate aspect, but I think it is in a way to make progress, to make sure that the flight information is being constantly transmitted rather than just being recorded on the flight.
Absolutely. That's very interesting. And eventually, as the technology progresses, I would imagine we would sort of grow out of the need for having a black box. Not that it's a hindrance to the flight. And there is an anecdotal question which is not necessarily related to in-flight Wi-Fi, but I've heard this question, and it was kind of fun to sort of think about. Is that a black box is made in a way that even in the event of a crash, it will survive, right? So someone asked, why isn't the whole plane made out of the black box material? So in the event of a crash, it wouldn't crash. I mean, my initial thought would be that, the material is not going to be flyable because, it would be quite heavy, and if the whole plane was made out of it, it wouldn't be able to take flight. But maybe there is another, also more pressing reason why
No, that's
it.
that's the reason because if you look at the aircraft material, it's mostly plastics and carbon fibers and aluminum, etc. Because see,
Yeah.
aircrafts have to withstand very high pressure, very drastic variations in temperatures because at the earth level it's about say 30 degrees, 40 degrees, 50 degrees, or minus 2, 3, 10 degrees. And when they're flying at a cruising altitude, it's minus 30 degrees. So they have to fly constantly from that altitude. So of course materials are different, and they have to be lighter because aircraft is limited to the amount of fuel it can carry. The distance it can travel is limited to the amount of fuel it can carry. The heavier it is, the lesser distance it can travel. So they have to reduce the weight of the aircraft. Now, if you want to reduce the weight of the aircraft, you can make it with very strong materials, like a Formula One car. They are made of carbon fiber, but carbon fiber breaks when it crashes. It breaks into a million pieces. Similarly, an aircraft is very light, very strong, but when it crashes, it breaks, right? So, of course, it can't be made with a black box material because that will be firstly heavy, it will be very difficult to use it, and then it will require a lot of fuel that you can't actually put on an aircraft in order to fly across the ocean.
Yeah, that reminds me of another aspect of aircraft. I mean, people also ask, like, why don't we, just like we have Tesla and electric vehicles, why don't we have electric aircrafts? And that's also to think, I mean, I think the answer I found was that the batteries required would be so heavy that it wouldn't be physically possible to take off because of the weight of the batteries required to power the necessary energy for the
So
travels.
there are electric aircrafts being considered, and you're right, it is limited by the weight of the battery because the best Tesla can go up to 300 to 500 kilometers. Now imagine, and that's just a vehicle. So imagine you have an aircraft that has those batteries that has about 1,000 people on it, and that has to
Mhm.
fly, say, 10,000 kilometers, okay, over ocean. So it has to store all that energy in its battery, and it has to discharge quickly because it has not just to provide the thrust for the aircraft, it has to provide everything: the heating, the air conditioning, the oxygen,
The
the
Wi-Fi.
Wi-Fi, everything in the aircraft has to be provided by the energy inside those batteries. So what they have started doing is they have started looking at chartered aircrafts. Chartered aircrafts are very small. They can take about 10 to 20 people, and they cover very short distances. So mostly for business trips. So you go from one city to another rather than taking a car, you just take a chartered flight and you go quickly. So that use case is where companies are now exploring the use of electric batteries for checking if we can actually provide enough thrust and carry the weight for a short distance.
Right. Okay. That's quite interesting to know, although a little bit off topic from our main topic. But yeah, no, it is quite interesting. So yeah, to our audience, I mean, some of you or maybe most of you have experienced flying in recent years, and you probably have been given the option of opting in for internet through Wi-Fi, and some of you may have used it. The speed may not be the same as what you get in your home, but it's still an amazing sort of progress of technology that while you're thousands and thousands of feet or meters on the air, you can still connect to your loved ones through text messages. And if you pay extra, I think you can also have video calls as well, in mid-air while you're traveling. So that's actually quite a bit of progress in of technology, and it's interesting to know the how the background technology is working and how it's bringing you and sending that data from the aircraft itself. So one of the things that I think is important to take away, that when you are ordering in-flight facilities, that's actually, sometimes you may have wondered that I am using the browser, so it's internet, but it's actually not internet, but it's intranet, which is a network only within the aircraft. So you're not actually accessing the rest of the world with that. But then once you pay, And in some cases nowadays, even the internet, the access to outside world is also included in your flight, without having to pay it as an add-on. But yeah, as the hope is, as the time progresses, as the technology becomes more and more available, we would kind of get used to or start to expect internet connection while we're on the aircraft. But yeah, I'm looking forward for that day to come. Hopefully you guys had a good understanding on in-flight aircraft. Is there anything else that we should cover, Amit, on this topic?
No, I think we have covered everything. I think with the Starlink aviation, I think in the next 2 to 5 years, we should see high-speed internet being offered inside aircrafts. Remember, I mean, we talked about in-flight Wi-Fi, but there are now underground Wi-Fi available as well, right? So if you travel in trains, tubes inside in London, you can actually get Wi-Fi signal in your phone, which is incredible. And not just Wi-Fi signal, but even cell phone signals. So you can actually
Yes,
talk to people while you're in the train. Of course, it's very loud, which doesn't serve the purpose, but uh, it's something that is being offered because as technology progresses, as people's requirements changes, we have to make sure that everyone has access to internet because you are able to communicate very quickly about any calamity or any issue that you're facing. So suppose you get trapped inside a tunnel, you can quickly connect with someone and send a message. So that's so powerful. Of course, you're again limited by whether your cell phone has enough charge or not. But smartphone has really revolutionized the way we interact with people all across the world.
absolutely. And yeah, I mean, just to be able to send a message or even just to be able to Google, what do I do in this situation, is going to help save your life in if you are ever in that situation. Hopefully not. But yeah, I mean, even the cell phones are available, signals are available underground in London and probably in many other countries as well. So yeah, it's a lot of technical progress, and in aircraft, I think one of the things to be thankful of is to be able to connect to your loved ones. A lot of us are nervous flyers, but if you are having that extra comfort of being close to your loved ones, that might give you that satisfaction or comfort while flying, that yes, you are still in connected with your loved ones, and you feel a bit more comforting, the whole experience of flying. So hopefully with that, you guys had a good sort of experience listening to our sort of insight on this topic. Hopefully you guys again will tune in to our next week's topic, and as we go more and more with cover more and more topics in this tech talk, please do feel free to subscribe or save our feed to whichever platform you're listening to us in, and we hope to see you again next week.
Thank you so much, guys.
Thank you.